Welcome to the Commonwealth Policy Center's Candidate Forum. I'm your host, Richard Nelson. Joining us for this segment is 5th District Republican State Senator Steve Meredith. Senator Meredith has served in the state legislature since 2016, and he's now seeking a third term. This district covers western Kentucky counties of Breckenridge, Butler, Grayson, Meade, and Ohio counties. Senator Meredith, welcome to the forum.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to participate. Thank you.
You're welcome. Hey, for the record, we did invite your general election opponent, and they declined to participate. So you will have the next 20 minutes to talk about some of the things you've done while serving in the state Senate, and also about what you plan to do if you're reelected for a third term. Steve, I'd like to begin by going right to your website, and you list a number of policy priorities there. And I want to go with the very first one. You say that you want to ensure that our government lives within its means. Tell us, now you've had a front row seat to state government. Not just that, but you voted on budget bills for the last 8 years. What does it mean for the government to live within its means?
Well, I think what Kentucky has done, our last two budget sessions in particular, shows what it means. We've been able to save money in our rainy day account. We've been able to put funding into needed services, even with that. And it shows what happens when you can live within your means. I think this last budget session, we made more contributions to local communities than we've ever been able to make because we put money aside for that purpose. And I wish the federal government could do the same, would do the same. But you look at the inflation we're dealing with right now, and it's tied directly to overspending by our federal government, and we're financing this on the backs of our children and grandchildren. Fortunately, in Kentucky, because of our Constitution, we can't do that. And I think as responsible Republicans, we wouldn't do that. So I'm really proud of the fiscal policies we've established for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and cannot be more proud of how we've made this thing advance over the last 8 years.
Steve, you also mentioned on your website that you want to make sure that our state government has and operates within complete transparency. When you first got into office back in 2016, I think 2017 was your first session, did you see things that were not fully transparent? And if so, what has been done since then to address that?
I most certainly have, and unfortunately continue to see that today. I thought it was interesting that the first year that I served was Governor Bevin's second year. And when I would talk to people in various cabinets about things that we wanted to do, that we should do, it's like their eyes would glaze over. And I couldn't help but think that they're thinking that, well, we've been here a long time. You're not going to be, so we're just going to ignore you. And that's what happens. But, I'm the co-chair of the Government Contract Review Committee meeting, and have been since 2018. And one of the first things I noticed on that committee were the number of requests for retroactive approvals of contract, sometimes months after the fact. That's not being transparent, and I'm very proud. That's one of the things as co-chair of that committee that I have virtually stopped, because I told people, so we're not going to do that. We can't retrospectively look at these things and determine whether they're appropriate or not, and many times they're not. And again, I'm very proud of the fact that we have virtually eliminated that altogether. If it does occur, I now have people coming to me before the meetings and say, very sorry, apologetic, and shouldn't have happened, and here's what we're faced with. We won't let it happen again. So I'm very proud of that, and that brings transparency. But it's still there, and it's couched in these contracts where all we get is a thumbnail description of what the contract is for, and have to do a lot of digging sometimes to really understand what the intent is. And that's not a fun process to do, but very proud of the work of our Government Contract Review Committee to bring more transparency to the process.
Steve, I want to press into this a little bit further for those who really don't pay close attention to state government, which is many people, because we're busy working our jobs, taking care of our families, and we really don't focus on Frankfurt maybe like we should. But when it comes to contracts, the state has many, many contracts in many different areas, whether it's building roads or healthcare contracts, or you name it, all kinds of different contracts. And one thing that your committee does is they review these contracts. One thing in particular I've seen come up in the news in the last year or so are contracts that have only had one bidder, which is problematic. especially when you're dealing with millions and millions of dollars. And the idea behind your committee reviewing these contracts is that there is transparency. That was the question I first began off with. But it's also to make sure that Kentuckians are getting the best deal for their tax dollars. It's also to ensure that there's not some kind of corruption going on. Has there? So here's my question: has there been any policy put in place, any laws enacted that would require rebidding of contracts? Let's say if there's only one bid that has been put in place. You mentioned one thing that you're doing. You're requiring at least a review with appropriate time given before the contract is awarded. But is there anything else that has been done by the state legislature to protect taxpayer dollars and to protect the integrity of the process?
We certainly have tried, and two things come to mind. Is one of the things that I really scrutinize besides retroactive approval contracts are sole source contracts. And there has to be an explanation given for those. But I find it hard to believe that a nation of 340 million people, that when we bid a contract, there's only one vendor for it. So I really scrutinize that and ask the question, is really, this is the only person, the only group that can do this. And I think that's kind of reduce the reliance on sole source contracts as well. But one of the limitations of our committee, people think that we can approve and disapprove contracts. We cannot. We can make a recommendation to approve or disapprove, but the final decision goes to the finance cabinet. And you can imagine more often than not, over the last 8 years, actually 6 years, they've overruled us on many, many occasions. And we have tried to pass a law to let that final decision be made by our state treasurer rather than the finance cabinet, because finance cabinet, that person is not an elected position. It's a government appointee. And we think in terms of transparency and fairness of this whole process, that decision should be made by the state treasurer. But unfortunately, the state Supreme Court has overruled us 3 times we passed that bill, saying that it violates separation of powers, that the executive branch has the right to enter in these contracts to do business for the state. Obviously, we disagree, and we'll keep pursuing it, but that's one of the challenges we have. I think during my 7 years on that committee, 6 years on the committee, that we have disapproved multiple contracts, and only one that really comes to mind that was supported was a $1 million contract that we have been paying for the last 20 years to help improve the reading scores of our kids in Kentucky. Same firm each and every year. And as you know, our reading scores have declined since 2013. So I've asked the office question, why do we keep renewing this contract? And actually did not take testimony on it. I just made the motion not to renew it. And it was supported unanimously. And I really thought I would get pushback from the Department of Education and the Finance Cabinet, but ironically, they agreed with that one. So, that's kind of waste that we see in state government, just a lack of accountability for outcomes. And I've always said that I think for every dollar we spend, there should be a measurable return on investment. And if we can't document that, we really don't need to be entering into that contract.
Very good. Steve, the third issue of priority you list on your website is fight to protect the sanctity of life. Of course, Kentucky had a trigger law that went into effect after Roe v. Wade was overturned by the Dobbs decision in 2022. What more can be done to protect the sanctity of human life in the Commonwealth?
Well, I think first and foremost, we respect the decision of the United States Supreme Court on Roe v. Wade. And there's a lot of differences that my opponent and I have, but nothing is more stark than this one. You can see on her Facebook page that she supports re-implementing Roe versus Wade. And you know very well that during the Roe v. Wade period, that over 63 million babies' lives were terminated. And you look at a lot of societal problems that we're faced with today, and it goes back directly to the lack of respect for life. And we can't think that doesn't have an impact on it. Again, you go back to when that decision was made back in the mid 70s, and the same times when we saw an increase in gun violence, other crimes that involve violence. It's directly related to it. You can't kill 63 million babies and not affect the psyche of a nation. And I see it every day. I think, I've been told by my opponent over several elections that I'm a one position candidate, meaning pro-life. I said, well, I may be, but again, if a person is not going to respect the life of an innocent baby, what I really expect them to protect my life as well, my best interest, and I think it's as simple as that. And
Yeah.
it certainly is based on sound thinking on my part, and it's corrupts the soul of this nation if we allow this to continue. So I hope we just stand by the decision of the United States Supreme Court that we take no other action on it. I don't think there is any other action we need to take on it. Certainly, we're going to have to deal with the current situation with mail order abortion pills. That's going to have to be taken a look at. But other than that, we need to let the law stand as the Supreme Court dictated.
Kentucky is at a crossroads. We can choose to give in to the radical left, or we can choose to engage the culture in a God-honoring way.
I started the Commonwealth Policy Center because I believe that Christians have a responsibility to influence government and society to the glory of God. While the Commonwealth Policy Center's made a significant impact, our work isn't finished. If you'd like to join our movement working for timeless values, then head to our website.
To learn more, go to commonwealthpolicycenter.org.
If you're just joining us, you're tuned in to the Commonwealth Policy Center's Candidate Forum. I'm Richard Nelson, here with State Senator Steve Meredith, who represents the 5th Senate District in West Kentucky. Steve, pushing a little further on the abortion issue, we saw during the Democratic National Convention, abortion was a centerpiece. They talked about reproductive rights, a woman's right to choose. They also talked about exceptions. Now, under Kentucky's existing abortion law, the right to life is protected. The only exception that's allowed is to save and preserve the life of the mother. There was an effort in the state legislature this last session. A Republican in the House promoted a bill that would allow exceptions for rape and for incest. Is this a position you've taken a stand on?
It is. I don't support either one of those measures. Again, if it involves a child, we have the provision in place that if it endangers their health, there can be an abortion, and we hope and pray that'd be rare instances. But particularly a rape and incest, two wrongs don't make it right. And it's very unfortunate that a woman is facing that situation, but killing a baby is not the solution to the problem.
Yeah, very good. Let's move on to school choice. Hot topic. You and I joked just a few minutes before we start a little bit about the perception and some of the accusations that Republicans face. And one of them that's persisted over the last several years is that Republicans, number one, are opposed to public schools. Number two, are cutting funding or don't adequately fund public schools. But you say that you are in favor of adequately funding, in fact, demand adequate funding for our schools. Tell us briefly, Steve, what have you done in the legislature regarding public education and funding in particular?
That's something I'm very proud of. Before I came to the Senate in 2017, we'd gone through two consecutive administrations that had not funded education. And ironically, it was Democrat administrations that didn't fund it. And now we're being hammered by Democrats because they don't think we adequately fund education.
Yeah.
This last session, when we did the interview for the incoming Commissioner of Education, Dr. Robbie Fletcher, he was asking about the budget, and he said, he's got over 20 years experience in public education. He said, this is the best budget that he can ever recall. We have put the funding in there. We're spending 60 cents of every dollar on education. And hand in hand with that is addressing the pension deficit that was also created during the previous Democrat administration that has dug a financial hole for us. But again, we're spending 60 cents of every dollar just on education. 20% on the medical assistance program, 10% on incarceration. That just leaves 10% to address all the needs of our state of Kentucky. And, who are you going to deny services to in order to provide more funding to education? One of the things I'm very passionate about is our Medicaid waiver program for children who have severe intellectual and behavioral disabilities. We have a waiting list of 5,000 children. To me, that's almost immoral. And I'm very proud this last budget, we were able to fund 500 additional positions, but that's not enough. I'd like to see it totally thing related. So I think we got a good balance of within our budget, try to address as many needs as we can, and we'll improve education funding even more as our economy continues to grow. Our challenge when I came to Senate in 2017 was our income tax structure. We had 50% of our income that was exempted from taxation. 50%. We
Wow.
got 40% of our working age adults that are not in the labor force, so they're not contributing to it. Many are drawing entitlement payments, which increases financial burden. That left a very small percentage of Kentuckians carrying the full tax load for Kentucky. And who's that? Working families in Kentucky. That's why we decided we need to go to consumption-based tax, which again has really helped catapult our state forward in terms of financial stability and creating new jobs in Kentucky. So as we continue down this path, we will make sure that we get to zero personal income tax. And when we do that, that's going to put more money in working families' pockets and allow them to thrive. That's going to allow us to create more jobs, which means more revenue for our state, and we will fund public education. Regardless of what happens with Amendment 2, we will fund public education. We have a moral and legal responsibility to do that. We will do that. How are we going to do it? That's what we'll find out when we come back in 2025 legislative session, if this amendment passes.
Very good. Steve, you brought up a lot there, but let's just go with Amendment 2. The Republican-controlled legislature passed this constitutional amendment this past session, which puts this question to the voters. It will be on the ballot on November the 5th, that essentially says it would authorize some form of school choice in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. It does not prescribe any particular kind of school choice like charter schools or educational opportunity accounts. It simply says that school choice is an option in Kentucky. Two questions. Where do you stand on this issue, Amendment 2? And then also, where do the voters in your district stand on this issue?
Well, first, there's been a lot of misinformation. I think it's intentional. There's a lot of misinformation about what this amendment does. And it's called, I guess for the sake of brevity, the voucher amendment. There's nothing in that proposed amendment that talks about vouchers. What it does is give our legislature the authority to help establish educational policy, which we've never had before. It's there because our voters have asked for it. We're making a substantial investment in education, and people, again, want to see accountability for the dollars that are spent, and they don't see them. For me personally, what got my attention about this, and what I'm most passionate about, even though they're not in my district, but it's the west end of Louisville. For years, those children have been denied a quality education. You may recall it's been 3-4 years ago where they had dozens of schools that were failing.
Yeah.
What are those children in the west end of Louisville supposed to do? They had no other option. They couldn't escape. If you were a parent, would you really want to be faced with that situation? So this provides the children an out and addresses special needs that they may have, but it's our tax dollars. Why shouldn't people have a say in how those tax dollars were spent? So it's the purest form of democracy. It's the way our government is supposed to work. And quite truly, I have no idea how this amendment is going to play out. But if it does, again, if it passes, it vests our legislature with the responsibility to figure this out. And we will. And public education will not be shortchanged. But how can you deny people the right to determine the future of the education of children in Kentucky? And again, how do we address these areas that have fallen terribly short, who have deprived children of a quality education?
Yeah, very good. Steve, we are winding down here. We tried to keep this forum to 20 minutes, and we've got a few minutes left. I'd like to do a lightning round. So if I could share a topic with you, could you give a yes or a no answer? And we'll try to cover about a half dozen or so very quickly.
Sure.
Your position on recreational marijuana legalization, for it or against it?
Against it.
Gambling expansion?
Against it.
Abortion exceptions?
Against it.
Fully funding universal pre-K, which was introduced this last session?
That's one I'm going to have to say maybe, because the reason there's a maybe is we have to figure out its impact on child care, because schools don't operate 12 months out of the year. And a major source of revenue for them are the preschool students. And if we go this route, what happens to that particular service? So it's something that has to be studied. In theory, it sounds great, but practical application is the tough part.
Oh, very good. Fully eliminate the state income tax.
Yes. Quicker the better.
And then school choice.
Yes.
Okay, so very good. We covered some of these. I was being a little bit redundant, but this is the list that I had before I began the program. Well, Steve, are there any last thoughts? We got just a minute here. You've got the last minute to tell the voters why they should vote for you on Tuesday, November the 5th.
Well, thank you. I'm a strong conservative. I think is one of the strongest in our Senate. But beside that, it's what I call political practicality. In my district, we have 25,000 more Republicans than Democrats. And if my opponent were to be elected, she'll be one of what would then be 8 Democrat senators out of 38. The ability to do anything, regardless of what her best intentions are practically nil. Elections have consequences, and as she'll find out, she doesn't have a say, she doesn't have a vote, would not be able to get appropriations for her district. So for the period that she would serve in office, she would not have a voice. Our district would not have a voice. That makes no sense. I'm very proud of what we've accomplished over the last 8 years, and just want 4 more years to continue down this path to prosperity for Kentucky. We want to see every county lifted up, particularly our rural counties, and that's always been my focus.
Very good. Steve Meredith, Republican Senator for District 5. Thank you so much for joining CPC in this candidate forum. And thank you all for tuning in to Commonwealth Policy Center's special candidate forum. Don't forget to vote. Tuesday, November the 5th is Election Day, and early voting begins on Thursday, November the 1st.